Some children do not grow up in obviously broken homes. The refrigerator is full. The rent gets paid. School is taken seriously. No one is dragged through the chaos people usually associate with harm. And yet, the child learns something bleak before they have words for it. They learn that feelings are inconvenient, that joy should be toned down, that sadness should be handled privately, that fear is weakness, that neediness embarrasses the room, that the safest version of themselves is the smallest one. Years later, the adults these children become are often praised for being easy. They are considerate. They do not ask for much. They read the room quickly. They make themselves useful. They apologize for taking up space before anyone has accused them of doing so. People call them mature, low maintenance, independent. What those compliments often miss is the hidden cost. Many of these adults are not at peace. They are well trained in self-erasure. Their loneliness did not begin in adulthood. It began in a family system where they were cared for physically, but rarely met emotionally. Emotional neglect is difficult to recognize precisely because it is defined less by what happened than by what failed to happen. No single dramatic moment announces it. There is no cinematic scene everyone agrees was wrong. Instead, there are thousands of ordinary omissions. The child is upset, and no one helps them name the feeling. The child is excited, and no one joins them in it. The child is ashamed and receives correction without comfort. The child is scared and is told not to be dramatic. The child tries again tomorrow with a slightly quieter version of the same need. Then quieter still. Eventually, the child becomes easy, which adults tend to reward, even though ease is sometimes the visible shape of resignation. That is the cruelty of emotional neglect. It can masquerade as normal family life. Many parents who create it do not intend harm. Some are overworked. Some are anxious. Some were raised without emotional language themselves. Some love deeply, but only know how to provide in practical terms. Yet a child does not experience intention. A child experiences attunement, or the absence of it. Attunement is not perfection. No serious parent can mirror every feeling or respond elegantly to every crisis. Children do not need that. They need enough moments of being seen that their inner world starts to feel real to them. They need someone to notice when the bravado is actually fear, when the anger is grief, when the silliness is overstimulation, when the quiet is not peace, but retreat. Without that kind of response, a child is left alone with emotions too large to organize. And when a child is repeatedly left alone with feelings, they do not simply become stronger, they become strategic. They study which parts of themselves are welcome and which parts create irritation, delay, embarrassment, or emotional labor for the adults around them. Then, they adapt. The adaptation is often brilliant. It is also heartbreaking. One child becomes the achiever, hoping excellence will purchase warmth. Another becomes the helper, handling everyone else's mood so their own never has to be addressed. Another becomes invisible. Another becomes funny. Another becomes impossible, because even negative attention is less lonely than no emotional attention at all. What makes emotional neglect so enduring is that it attacks the architecture of self-knowledge. Children learn who they are partly by watching what happens when they show up emotionally. If they're comforted, they learn that distress is survivable. If delight is met with delight, they learn that joy is shareable. If anger is guided rather than shamed, they learn that intensity can be metabolized without destroying love. But if the room consistently goes cold, distracted, dismissive, mocking, or prematurely corrective, a different lesson takes hold. The child learns not merely that certain emotions are unwelcome, they learn that their own perception cannot be trusted. Maybe it did not hurt. Maybe it was too much. Maybe I am difficult. Maybe I should already be over this. That confusion follows them everywhere. They struggle to identify what they feel, then struggle even more to believe they are allowed to feel it. People often call this being out of touch with emotions, but it is more precise to say the person was trained to disconnect from internal evidence. That is why loneliness becomes such a central feature later in life. Emotional neglect does not only make people feel alone when no one is around, it can make them feel alone in the middle of intimacy. They may have friends, partners, colleagues, children, and still move through relationships with a quiet sense that no one really knows them. Part of that is circumstance, but part of it is procedural. They do not know how to offer themselves honestly, because honesty was not met well when it mattered most. They reveal just enough to remain connected, while keeping the most vulnerable layers under heavy guard. They can discuss tasks, ideas, logistics, politics, work, even other people's pain. But when conversation approaches their own core experience, they go abstract, go helpful, go funny, go silent, or suddenly become tired. Then they wonder why closeness keeps failing. The answer is not that they are incapable of intimacy. It is that intimacy feels structurally unsafe when your first experience of being emotionally known was neglect. This is one reason emotionally neglected children often grow into adults who appear highly competent. Competence becomes a substitute for connection. If being loved for who you are feels uncertain, being valued for what you do feels safer. So they overfunction. They become reliable, productive, insightful, indispensable. They make themselves useful in every room. Yet usefulness is not the same as being held in mind. A person can be praised constantly and still feel unseen. They can be admired and feel untouched. They can become excellent at work and feel strangely blank the moment achievement goes quiet. That blankness confuses them because from the outside, their life often looks stable. But the nervous system is still trying to solve the same childhood problem. How do I secure belonging in a place where my actual emotional needs seem like a burden? For some, the answer becomes perfectionism. For others, emotional minimalism. For others, compulsive caretaking. Different costumes, same hunger. The body keeps track of this hunger in subtle ways. The adult who was emotionally neglected may feel unreasonable guilt after asking for help. They may rehearse simple messages before sending them, terrified of sounding needy. They may feel shame after crying, even with people they trust. They may default to, "I'm fine," with such speed that they believe it for a moment. They may choose emotionally unavailable partners because distance feels familiar and pursuit feels purposeful. They may feel oddly restless around warmth because warmth threatens to reveal how long they have gone without it. None of this is weakness. It is adaptation. The system learned early that self-containment was safer than dependence. The tragedy is that what protected the child can impoverish the adult. A life built around not needing much often becomes a life starved of the very thing that would have nourished it. Parents sometimes hear all this and become defensive, which is understandable, but dangerous. They say, "I loved my child. I worked hard. I was there. I never abused them." All of that may be true. Emotional neglect is not a courtroom category in the way abuse is. It is a developmental reality. Love can be present, and attunement can still be thin. A parent may genuinely care, and yet respond to distress with advice when comfort was needed, with irritation when curiosity was needed, with problem-solving when simple presence was needed. Some parents fear emotion because no one helped them with theirs. Some confuse toughness with preparation. Some believe that minimizing pain builds resilience. But resilience does not grow from being emotionally alone. It grows from having emotion organized with you so that, over time, you can organize it yourself. A child repeatedly left to manage overwhelming feeling without help does not become strong in the healthiest sense. They become prematurely self-protective. One of the cruelest consequences of emotional neglect is that it often produces adults who do not feel entitled to the word neglect. They compare themselves to people who suffered obvious violence and conclude they have no right to speak. They tell themselves nothing terrible happened. They remember food, school, birthdays, vacations, family photos. They do not remember being hit. They remember being unseen. But because absence is harder to narrate than assault, they question themselves. This self-doubt can delay healing for years. They keep trying to solve adult pain with adult techniques while ignoring the childhood wound underneath. They think the problem is that they are too sensitive, too demanding, too dissatisfied, too broken, too hard to love. In reality, many are responding normally to a developmental gap that was never named. Once named, everything changes. The adult starts to understand that their chronic loneliness is not evidence of defect. It is evidence of a nervous system that learned early to survive without enough emotional shelter. Healing, then, is not a performance of blame. It is a restoration of contact. It begins when a person learns to witness their own internal life with the steadiness they once needed from someone else. That sounds simple, but it is not. For emotionally neglected adults, self-compassion can feel fake or indulgent at first. Slowing down long enough to ask, "What am I feeling right now?" can feel almost absurd. Asking, "What do I need?" can produce panic because the old training says needs create friction. And yet, this is where life starts to become more inhabitable. Not through grand reinvention, but through repeated acts of emotional truth. Naming disappointment before it turns into numbness. Admitting hurt before it mutates into withdrawal. Letting joy be visible without immediately apologizing for it. Choosing relationships where feeling is not treated as inefficiency. Learning that calm and coldness are not the same thing. Learning that independence and isolation are not the same thing either. If you are a parent, this conversation is not an invitation to guilt. It is an invitation to precision. Notice how often you move to correction before connection. Notice how quickly you explain away your child's feeling because their feeling creates urgency in you. Notice the moments when your child brings you something small and non-essential, a story, a joke, a fear, a triumph, and you respond as though they are interrupting the real work of the day. To a child, those moments are not small. They are how your face teaches them what their interior life is worth. You do not need to become endlessly expressive. You do not need to validate every conclusion or remove every discomfort. But you do need to make room for the child's inner world to exist in your presence without being instantly edited into something easier for you to handle. And if you were that child, the one who learned to disappear elegantly, the one who became useful instead of known, then it may help to hear this clearly. The loneliness you carry is not proof that you are unlovable. It may be proof that love reached you in forms too practical to soothe you and too thin to teach you how to stay connected to yourself. That history matters, but it is not destiny. You can learn new emotional reflexes. You can build relationships where your interior life is not an inconvenience. You can stop performing invulnerability for people who have not earned it. You can become less efficient at self-erasure. And if this gave language to something you have felt for years but never quite named, subscribe. This channel is for people who want to understand family life at the level where it shapes identity, attachment, and the hidden economics of love. And send this video to one person genuinely close to you, someone with whom you want to build healthier, wiser relationships with the children in your lives. Sometimes one honest conversation interrupts a silence that has lasted decades. Because emotional neglect rarely announces itself when it begins. It reveals itself later in the adult who is loved but cannot feel it, needed but never addressed, admired but still lonely, surrounded but somehow unaccompanied. The good news is that what was missing can still be learned, not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to make life less numb, relationships less performative, and home less lonely than the one you first knew. There is also a generational pattern here that deserves honesty. Many emotionally neglectful homes are not loveless in the conventional sense. They are emotionally underfunded across generations. Grandparents survived by hardening. Parents inherited competence without attunement. Children then inherit the same scarcity unless someone interrupts it. That interruption does not happen through slogans. It happens when one adult in the family decides that practical care is not enough, that provision without emotional presence leaves a child overexposed on the inside. It happens when a parent can tolerate a child's tears without rushing to silence them, can receive excitement without shrinking it, can say, "I see why that hurt," before trying to teach a lesson. Those moments look small from the outside. Developmentally, they are enormous. They tell the child that feelings are not contaminants in the family system. They are information and invitation. The opposite lesson is devastatingly efficient. Children who are emotionally neglected become experts at reading what other people can handle. They monitor mood, timing, facial tension, busyness, tone. They know when a parent is too tired, too brittle, too preoccupied, too defended. They postpone themselves accordingly. By adolescence, many no longer even experience this as a choice. It feels like personality. I'm just private. I don't want to bother people. I'm better on my own. Sometimes that is partly true, but very often privacy is simply old disappointment reorganized as identity. The child who repeatedly found no room for their emotional life becomes the adult who no longer tries to make room. And because that adaptation is so elegant, the world rewards it. The person looks composed, self-sufficient, undemanding. No one sees how much life is happening behind glass. That is why the work of repair is so quiet and so radical. To let yourself be real in the presence of another person and discover that the room does not collapse. To ask for comfort before you have earned total exhaustion. To speak before certainty. To stop confusing invisibility with safety.